Picture waiting 8 hours in line just to fill up your gas tank. This isn't a normal fuel shortage line. This is a wartime line. And it's happening right now, on a piece of land Russia keeps calling a victory. Subscribe now, because this story is about to get a lot stranger. In 2014, Russia took the Crimean Peninsula almost without firing a single shot. It was sold to the world, and especially to the Russian people, as Vladimir Putin's greatest geopolitical win. The ultimate proof that Russia was a superpower again, more than 2 decades after the Soviet collapse. In the years that followed, the Kremlin spent big to prove that win actually meant something. It built a $4 billion bridge across the Kerch Strait, linking the Peninsula Strait to Russian soil. A highway opened in 2018. A railway followed in 2019. To put that $4 billion in perspective, that's enough money to build more than 60 new hospitals. And all of it went into a single structure, in a single spot on the map. Along with the bridge came new military bases, radar systems, airfields, naval infrastructure, all built after the annexation, turning Crimea into something like a floating fortress for Russian power. When Russia invaded Ukraine again in 2022, it was that exact base that let Moscow launch strikes across the entire south of the country. Tourism came roaring back too. Nearly 4 million Russians visited the peninsula in 2025 alone, drawn by the beaches, the climate, and the same summer camps that have existed since the Soviet era. That's basically the same number of visitors as before the war. For Moscow, Crimea became a postcard proving the war had no real cost for the average citizen. You could turn on the TV, see military bases, parades, victory speeches, and 3 miles away, a Russian family soaking up the sun on a beach like nothing was happening at all. But I promise you, behind that showcase of power, there's a bill nobody in Moscow wants to show you. Before I show you how that bill came due, let me point you to another video on this channel about how an economic blockade can break a country without a single army ever crossing the border. Worth watching right after this one. Now, back to Crimea. The first layer of this story is geography, and that's where the Kremlin's first miscalculation lives. Crimea is, by nature, almost an island. Only one strip of land connects it to the mainland, the Isthmus of Perekop, and that strip is less than 4.5 miles wide. The rest of the border is cut off by the Savash, a maze of shallow lagoons and salt marshes nicknamed the Rotten Sea, nearly impossible to cross with any heavy logistics. Outside that isthmus, there are only 2 other points solid enough to hold a road and a railway, at Konhar and along the Arabat Spit. In other words, all the land logistics for a peninsula of 2.5 million people run through 3 narrow corridors. That's it. That's exactly why Russia built that billion-dollar bridge over the Kerch Strait. It was never just a symbol of power. It was an attempt to fix, with money, a problem geography had never actually solved. Crimea has always been isolated by nature. A massive investment sitting on top of a vulnerability that was never truly corrected, only dressed up. And that brings us to the second layer, the structural one. Ukraine knows it doesn't have the military strength to retake the peninsula on the battlefield. So since May of this year, it adopted a strategy it calls a logistics blockade. Instead of soldiers, medium-range drones. Instead of advancing troops, systematically hitting every single supply route that keeps the peninsula running, in a slow, almost financial chokehold. The stated goal, according to Ukraine's defense minister in a recent interview, is to turn Crimea into a real island. And the strategy is working, layer by layer. The Kerch Bridge itself, Russia's biggest investment in the region, has already been hit at least 3 times since 2022. In October of that year, a truck bomb destroyed 2 sections of the structure, and repairs took months. In July 2023, a naval drone strike took down another section. In June 2025, explosives planted underwater hit the support pillars. After every attack, Russia rolled out tougher restrictions. Trucks over 1.5 tons were banned from crossing, and fuel transport across the bridge was cut back sharply, out of fear another strike could set the whole thing on fire. The result is that the most expensive, most symbolic route of the occupation also became the most fragile, and the least useful for heavy cargo. With the bridge restricted, most of the cargo shifted to a highway that cut straight through occupied Ukrainian territory, the R-280, connecting the Russian mainland to the peninsula through Melitopol and Konhar. Except since April, that highway has been under systematic bombardment. Fuel and ammunition trucks exploding, plus 1-pound mines with magnetic and motion sensors buried in the asphalt, built to detonate hours after the first strike, with zero warning. The occupation nicknamed it the Tavrida Route. Ukrainians already call it the Highway of Death. In June, a Ukrainian drone unit claimed full aerial control over an entire stretch of that highway, between Melitopol and Konhar. And the numbers back that up. According to Ukraine's 414th Strike UAV Brigade, Russian military cargo traffic on that highway dropped 71% in just 2 weeks. To put that in perspective, that's like 7 out of every 10 trucks feeding the peninsula simply stopped showing up in under 15 days. And it didn't stop at the highway. Satellite images show bridges knocked out at 3 critical points. The central Konhar Bridge, hit 3 times in June alone, forcing Russia to throw together a makeshift floating bridge right next to it. The Henichesk Bridge, which leads to the Arabat Spit, and the bridges over the North Crimean Canal, which feed into the Perekop Isthmus. 50 trucks loaded with fuel and ammunition, rerouted specifically to dodge the attacks at Konhar, were hit on June 11th while trying to cross near Armyansk. That's when the third layer of this machine kicks in, and maybe the most decisive one. Drones started targeting the fuel depots on both sides of the Kerch Strait, in Kerch and in Kavkaz, the same depots that have historically supplied the entire southern front. And in late June, drones burned 3 of the 5 ferries that crossed between the mainland and the peninsula, essentially shutting down that service, one of the last alternative routes still available. Russia even came up with a strange defense to try to hide the Kerch Bridge from drones. Vehicles that release artificial smoke during attacks, trying to camouflage the structure inside the cloud. But smoke doesn't fix a fuel shortage. And it definitely doesn't rebuild a burned ferry. And that brings us to the final layer, the one that actually hits people's wallets and daily routines. Gas rationing started in May, with lines stretching for miles at the pumps. Russian tourists started bringing their own fuel cans from home, packing like they were headed on an expedition, not a beach vacation. One of those tourists told the Washington Post, quote, "They saw lines of more than 8 hours at a single gas station," end quote. By late June, things got so bad that the occupation administration simply banned fuel sales to civilians altogether. Whatever was left would be reserved strictly for military use and essential services. The next day, the Russian-installed governor of Sevastopol, a city of more than 500,000 people, announced a wave of restrictions that looked like wartime rationing anywhere else in the world. Public transit shut down after 10 p.m., shops and cafes closing at 8 p.m., streetlights turned off to save power. Residents were told to shut off their air conditioning, even with temperatures near 86 degrees. Blackouts started hitting water service too, since the pumps run on electricity. Even riding a motorcycle at night got banned, with officials claiming the noise interferes with anti-drone defenses. Summer camps, youth competitions, and sports training for kids were all cancelled through September. Officially, for security reasons. In practice, because there wasn't enough fuel to keep anything running. And tourism, the one thing that proved the war cost the average person nothing, collapsed right in the middle of the busiest season of the year. June bookings dropped by half compared to May. July and August are already down more than 30% compared to the same stretch last year. This is the same local economy that 1 year earlier welcomed almost 4 million visitors, now staring at empty hotels at the peak of high season. In late June, when the occupation declared a state of emergency on the peninsula, thousands of cars tried to flee at once across the Kerch Bridge, creating a 9-mile traffic jam. These weren't satisfied tourists heading home after vacation. These were people running from a peninsula that, just months earlier, was being sold as modern Russia's greatest source of pride. You might be thinking, isn't this just a temporary side effect of war, something any occupied region would go through? It's worth looking at the other side of the border. Ukrainian cities hit during this same stretch also deal with power cuts and restrictions, but they don't carry the symbolic weight of being a government's proof of victory. For Ukraine, showing hardship reinforces the story of resistance. For Russia, showing hardship in Crimea tears down the entire story of conquest. That contrast is what turns an ordinary logistics problem into a full-blown crisis of legitimacy. And the fallout doesn't stay inside the peninsula. Without Crimea working as a fully functioning logistics base, Russia has to reroute part of its military supply chain further north, into territory that's more exposed and more vulnerable to attack. Every extra 50 to 60 miles on a truck route cuts the amount of supply that can arrive each day by roughly 30%. Less supply means less capacity to push forward on the front line, and even Russia's own air defense crews, the ones responsible for shooting down these drones, are reportedly having to ration their own fuel. So maybe the real question isn't whether Russia will lose Crimea on the battlefield. Maybe the real question is this: how long can a government keep the image of victory alive while the people living inside it go without power, without water, and without gas? Now you know. What you do with that is up to you. If this video showed you something you'd never stop to think about, hit like, drop a comment on what stood out to you, and subscribe to the channel. Because every showcase has a price, and the one paying it is never the one cashing in.